I'm a dairy farmer from over the hill at Kaharoa, and I would also like to acknowledge Paula and Janie. They're both ladies that I have come to know in my journey over recent years. I'd also like to acknowledge that in my experience, Paula has always gone above and beyond to gain understanding of the specific issues, and I thank you for that. I know that you have taken the time to do that. So I'm going to tell my personal story. It's a little bit different to the two speakers before, and the rural community that I come from, really. As a dairy farmer, I think the topic of today, our women, our land and our water, is quite relevant to how we operate at home on our farm. And I'd open by saying that our farming businesses today go way beyond the farm gate. The days of us being able to milk the cows, shut the gate and go home have long gone. We have to be politically active. We have to be aware and we have to work within our communities. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on one example of some of the water stuff that's happening and the responses that have come from the Rotorua community. So we have Plan Change 10, which works across Lake Rotorua and the lakes around the Rotorua district. And this is a lesson. Plan Change 10 became a lesson in collective action for us. It became a lesson in compromise, and it became a dose of reality. We formed an incorporated society in Rotorua called the Lake Rotorua Primary Producers Collective. It had a membership of about 48 people, families, businesses. It encompassed all of the dairy farmers that resided within the Lake Rotorua catchment and most of the large commercial dry stock farms as well. At that time, and it was actually formed back in 2011, we also had the iwi groups, the iwi members, very active within our party. That isn't the case anymore, unfortunately, and I'll explain why later on. I came on board as the secretary in 2013, and I'm still there today. We cover about 10,000 hectares of the catchment. The catchment itself, from memory, is about 50,000, so a good proportion, and most of that is in pastoral land. Why did we have a need to form a collective to work together? We decided that we needed to stand united and that we were in a fight for survival back in 2011. We wanted to maintain some freedom to farm. There were pushbacks and lots of new controls, and we thought we were up against it in 2011. You've just seen this morning what's coming out in the last 2 years, really, and we didn't know half of it back then. Rule 11 was implemented, and it indicated that, well, it ruled that there was no further intensification on our lands. And we viewed this as an impingement on our property rights. So the men particularly were up in arms, and at that time the men were very active in forming the group and fighting. These days it seems to be the ladies that are continuing the battle. They've all gone back to the farm and on into other areas, but it's the ladies that are keeping things going. The problem at the time was water quality, weed growth and algae blooms, and the farmers were to blame. I don't know if you can recall, but there were headline press articles about Lake Rotorua being the toilet bowl, and there were issues also publicised of community members arriving at the mayor's desk with buckets of stagnant water. And so action was taken. There was lots of science commissioned, and knowledge was gained, and targets were set. And this is where the regional council and the farmers, I was going to say work together, but at that stage we were working from opposite sides, but through a long relationship we have ended up sitting on the same side of the table on several occasions. So Plan Change 10 was created. It came out of a group called STAG. It was a stakeholder advisory group, and that group itself consisted of representatives from across all industry boards, regional council, district council, landowners, beef and lamb, dairy NZ, federated farmers. We spent 3 years working through all the issues. And my point from that particular process is that because we felt heard by all at that point, we were prepared to accept the collective decisions. We came to understand that rules were necessary and that times were going to change, that we had to move on. The rules meant that each farm was given an allocation. It was decided through science that the lake could only sustain 435 tonne of nitrogen in a year, so we had a finite amount of nitrogen that could be created or would arrive in the lake, and that was to go across all users, so that was urban as well as pastoral farming and everybody else in between. We had to reduce 320 tonne from what was expected to arrive in the lake in the long term. They actually have set a date of 2080 as the ultimate as to when the maximum amount of nitrogen will come through the groundwater. 320 tonne is an awful lot of nitrogen to be found, and that was split across several ways of finding it. They decided that we could reduce the amount. The collective itself worked hard to come up with a proposal which we put to council, and it was agreed at the end of that they would reduce the 320 down to 140, and that the council would take responsibility for some of the remaining nitrogen through other ways and means. They were looking at engineering. They discovered that gorse actually produced an awful lot of nitrogen, and so they took on a project to remove the gorse from the district. So our share then became 140 tonne, and this was divided up between all the landowners in the district, right down to 5 hectare blocks. So the farmers were then charged with deciding how they were going to run their farm systems to meet the NDA that they were allocated. And for most farmers, it meant that we had to do a 35%, and in some cases up to 40% reduction in nitrogen export on an annual basis, year in and year out. And to do that, we needed to create farm plans that demonstrated the actions that we would take on farm. And those farm plans were tied to our resource consent. So I thought I'd just explain a little about what we've done on our farm to date. So we purchased our bare block of land back in 1995, and we converted it to dairy. It's 126 hectares, of which 110 hectares is effective. It's flat to very gentle rolling. It's actually a valley floor, but it does have rhyolite hillocks that pop up. We're 450 metres above sea level, so we do get quite cool weather and lake frosts. We have a rainfall of 2.5 metres, which is considered high in the district. If you consider that the likes of Kaharoa or the Waikato receive 1,500 mil, we get at least another metre on top of that. And our rain comes in storm flow events all at once. It's not unusual to get 4 inches of rain in a morning. Our soils are free draining, they're a pumice. We now milk about 270 cows, and we employ a 50-50 share milker who employs one other team member. Our production on farm averages around the 100,000 plus mark. So what have we done since we got involved with Plan Change 10? We've adopted all of the good management practices that have been promoted. So all of our risk factors were identified. We installed or built a new 60-day lined effluent pond, and we purchased a new low applicator irrigator, a new low application irrigator. We reduced our stock numbers significantly. We used to milk 300 cows, we're now milking 270. And we haven't, to be fair, we haven't reduced our production or lost that much production as a result of that. We've halved our nitrogen fertiliser application. We no longer winter crop at all, which has reduced sediment loss. We've retired most of the hills into trees. And on our ephemeral flow paths, which are dry land corridors, if you like, for storm flow, we've installed stock crossings so that the cows no longer need to walk through any water at any time. We've concreted fords in our raceway systems to allow for storm flow when it does come from these dry ephemeral flow paths. Part of the best management practice means no fertiliser applied at all through the winter months. The other recommendation is that you cull early in the autumn so that you reduce the loading on the land, less urine stored in the dry season to be washed through the soil profile when the rains do come. We've put rubber on the yard, which has created a standoff area where all the effluent is captured within the effluent pond system and stored through the winter, which can then be applied in the springtime. We have a dedicated bunker, silage bunker, that's been built and created, so we no longer do individual bales, therefore less plastic is created and wasted. And we have joined, of course, the recycling scheme that has been created within the agricultural industry for the recycling of drums. And we built the first detainment bund. So Jamie and I strongly believe that the future of agriculture, or the future of all agriculture in New Zealand, is going to be determined by science and technology. That we need to, as farmers, invest time and money in the science and the technology. I talked about the detainment bund. It's something that a neighbour of ours, who also was an employee of Regional Council at the time, feels really passionate about, as did another of our local farmers. He had had them on his farm 25 years prior to this, and they can take many forms. In some instances, they're just sources in the land, indentations, where storm flow passes through and settles for a short time before it overflows and carries on along its pathway. And in that time that it's reaching the top of the saucer, sediment settles out. And it's the sediment that creates the problem for our waterways, and that's the area that we really need to be targeting. The detainment bund, in effect, is a dam, an earth dam. And I have a couple of pictures of our one in full flood. As I said to you, we can have 4 inches in a morning. Right. So this is the bund operating. This has come from science and from new technologies. The bund itself is keyed into the ground. So we started off with a flat paddock, and it was actually a narrow channel was dug out, and the earth then rebuilt back up over it and then regrassed. And it has a riser in that shed there. This is part of a science experiment that we participated in with council and a lot of other agencies. But as a result of the 3 years' work from that trial, it was determined that we can capture 60% of the the sediment generated on our land by holding that water for 3 days. And along with that sediment, of course, we're capturing the phosphate, and it's the phosphate in the lakes and the rivers that creates the problem. So they've just started yet another trial using the detainment bunds. It's just kicking off now as we speak. That was a 3-year project, finished 12 months past. They employed a gentleman from Canada doing his masters out of Massey to do all of the science, the technical stuff, and he's written science papers on it, and it's actually gone worldwide. He's spoken overseas on this aspect that started off in little old Rotorua. There is scope on our farm for another 3 of these bunds. This catchment area that put that amount of water there is only 50 hectares, and it captures water from all of our neighbours as well. But 60%, that's it. You can see how it's coming through after the 3 days of settlement. It's been released, and it flows gently on down into it actually goes through a concrete ford across more pasture land, whereby we can capture more sediment, and then down into the local stream. So that was one trial, the phosphorus mitigation trial that we did. We also participated for 4 years in a high rainfall trial with ag research out of Hamilton. Stuart Leadgard is a doctor in soil sciences. He oversaw that trial. It was felt by the farmers that 2.5 metres of rainfall, most of which was runoff, should indicate that we don't lose as much nutrients through the soil profile into the ground aquifers. Unfortunately, the trial proved that we do lose almost as much as overseas says. There is some variation, and certainly soil types do make a difference. The trial was run on 2 farms, ours and one in Mamaku, and it was determined that the heavier clay soils certainly don't leach the same amount of nutrients as the more free sand or pumice soils. And a third trial that we're participating in today is one with this machine called Spiky. We're allowing our farm to be used by this research trial, and Spiky passes over a pasture paddock that's been grazed by animals within 24 hours of grazing, and it's got electronic mechanisms within the front of that detect where the urine patches are in the soil. And they can do that by those aluminium probes just break the surface, and the conductivity of the soil is different where there's a urine patch because it's high in nitrates to a piece of soil on the other side of it which has no urine. And surprisingly, only 5% of a pasture ends up with urine patches, although they're spread all over, but it's only 5% of a paddock that has them. This machine detects those urine patches and sprays a liquid over those that allows the nitrates in the urine to dissipate sideways, so it grows the patch by up to 4 times, and also promotes the grass roots to take up those nitrogens. It actually holds the nitrates at the grass root level for up to 4 days longer than it would have if it hadn't been treated. So it's new, exciting technology. There's lots of things that are starting to happen, and it's only really because we didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't understand, and there wasn't the science until the last 15 or so years back, the impacts of farming. But now that we do have some science and some knowledge, these amazing people are coming up with some of this stuff that's going to help us into the future. The trial's ongoing. As I say, we're only about 8 months through the first year, but we do know and we can see increased grass growth as a result of this. Consequently, we don't need the same fertiliser, and we don't use anything like the nitrogen fertiliser that we used to use. So it's another positive. And just an aside to that, from science flows technology. And there's lots of things coming onto the market that are going to help farmers be better at what they do. We've got things like ProTrack, which is an electronic drafting system. We've got space satellite grass measurement systems. It's called Space. We subscribe to it. A satellite passes over the farm every month, and we get a computer program with a map of the farm, and it's colour-coded as to where the grass is on the farm, and it's really accurate because we've gone out and truth tested it by plate metering. So it will tell you which paddocks have got X amount of kilograms of dry matter in. Of course, there's the Overseer computer program, and that's in the process of being reviewed and upgraded. But that helps farmers to understand what they're doing on their farm. It's not just about cow numbers and urine and fertiliser. It's an equation of all of the inputs that come into a farm minus all the exports that go out. So the milk that goes out carries nutrients with it, the meat that goes out, the supplements that go out. So the Overseer computer program helps us come up with a figure that indicates to us how well we're operating or not operating. You can get sex semen now, so we don't need to create byproducts or waste products out of the breeding industry. We can choose to raise more female stock if we wish to. There are new fertilisers available on the market. We've changed from granular urea to prilled urea, which is a minute, tiny prill. It's much more accurate. It actually sticks onto the leaf as opposed to dropping to the soil and then being dissolved and going through the soil, so it's absorbed more by the actual leaf itself, and it's actually administered at the same time as the tractor is treating the grass, if we choose to use it, so that it saves on costs and machinery as well. And we can get away with 10 kilograms, whereas before you might have used 40 kilograms. So it is a much better product. And at discussion group on Monday, they were talking about yet another new product called Black Magic, which is a coated urea type product that's got a humate over it, that again you can use extremely smaller quantities of, and it promotes much more grass growth as well. We have now a proliferation of cow collars that we can buy to put on cows when you lease them. And these collars monitor the behaviour of a cow. So you get, and we get it on the phone, as to this cow is unwell and you need to check her. We had them demonstrated at discussion group on Tuesday, and the guy that's only had them in his herd for 2 weeks had the machine identify a cow with pneumonia that the staff hadn't picked up on.
That's fantastic.
He has ProTrack in his shed. The collar tells ProTrack which animals are needing to be drafted out for mating because they're at the right part of their cycle for AB. And it, as I said, it picks up on animal health. So it's not only illness, but it also identifies when a cow's not been walking to the same degree that it had been prior. So you need to look at this animal because she might be lame or some other reason. So there's lots of new technology, and of course there's apps for all sorts now. My son, it amazes me, I can't keep up with it, but you can get an app to cover off everything. Right, environmental management is more than just farm systems, and we can all play a part. Look at your local area. Where does your water come from and go to? We did. I've done some work at home creating the Hauraki subcatchment. We have about 8 subcatchments that all feed into Lake Rotorua. And we need to be doing some work within those sub-catchments. As much as we're doing things on our farm, we need to look at it as a collective again. So we got the community together, called a public meeting, and we learnt about our catchment. We walked it and we took photos of it. And we were quite surprised actually. It's quite different to what we thought it would be. In places it narrows down to barely a stride wide, but it's extremely deep. It's carved itself out through rhyolite rock. So just learning about the catchment itself was quite an education process. But we've also run field days trying to get our people, the landowners, to look at reducing phosphorus runoff. That was the title of the field day. So we went out and did a walk fest, which Janie helped with, and we identified hotspots and how to overcome those. One that we held just this year that Janie helped facilitate again was critical source mitigations. So again, we had an education session in the hall with lots of photos on what critical sources were and what critical sources are areas where soil is lost from, and along with that of course come nutrients. So there were tips and tricks on how to overcome those, and then we went out and looked at land and we saw how a local farmer has been able to overcome those critical source areas and how you can keep pasture instead of having animals track it down to bare soil. So catchment groups create a sense of unity and pride. Our to-do list within our catchment, lots more bunds. The one that we had was 50 hectares, but you can do them for much smaller areas. Of course, with that bund comes a sediment trap, which is ideal for water off running to the lake. Lots of pest control, both plant and animal control. And Janie's alluded to the stoats and the rats. In our catchment, that's been identified as our biggest need, putting out traps. And then also riparian management. We do have, our riparian areas have been well planted, but it goes back to the late 80s, and so we need to review and look at it again. In parts of our riparian strips on farm, we have 40-foot eucalyptus trees that were planted by days of old predecessors. They're not considered to be ideal catchment trees today. Our knowledge on riparian management has changed a lot. So it's on our to-do list to remove those trees, but if anybody's dropped trees, you know how much hard work there is in dropping them and cleaning them up. And then of course once they come out we have to replant, and that's again, it's part and parcel of the catchment work. So that's part of my story so far, my work with the collective, my work with the catchment group, my work at home on farm. It's been a steep learning curve because I have no tertiary education per se. I have spent the last 10 years working within the resource management front, as Paula alluded to. We have had commission hearings, we've been to Environment Court twice. I've given evidence in court on behalf of my fellow farmers. All daunting to say the least. But I have to say at the end of it, as much as we fought it at the beginning, I feel that we have come out of the process with much better understanding. We do feel that we have been heard and we have had an influence on the way that the rules were structured. So I feel that farmers working together, the collective, has been a benefit. And so in summary, I'm going to say that it bothers me that dairy farmers continue to receive sustained criticism on all fronts. that farming generally gets a hard time from all sectors. I don't believe that we set out to do harm. We are looking for solutions and we want to be part of the debate. You don't know what you don't know until the facts are presented. This is the situation we find ourselves in. Knowledge and fact are power and actions can follow. Rural New Zealand has been cruising. Life was good through the 80s and 90s, but times have changed. People have real concerns with water, climate, markets and chemicals. We all need to work together. We need to support our political front. I'm a strong supporter of Federated Farmers and Rural Women New Zealand because they talk to their members. They check in and they seek direction. I believe they do a great job in Wellington, ensuring that the thinking down there considers the practicalities, the social implications and the financial impacts on rural New Zealand for the policies that they keep generating. I supported the first groundswell protest only because it showed New Zealand that farmers can stand together when challenged, that there is unity in our ranks, but I strongly believe you need to be at the table to have influence and direct change, and I hope that the continued actions of this group do not affect our elected leaders' working relationship with government. I accept we need to be more accountable for our actions, but we also need to be right. But we also need to feel proud of the great job that we do, and we need to stop apologising. If we are doing the job right, we have nothing to fear, is my philosophy, and has proven true so far. Our industry bodies have all implemented sturdy audit processes to capture and highlight the minority that have practices of concerns. Agriculture is deemed an essential service by government. We need food production. The systems that produce it will change, hopefully for the better, but the sustainability of agriculture and pastoral farming into the future is certain. And on a closing note, there's often comments about animals farming, pastoral farming animals particularly, stock, beef dry stock, not being there into the future. But I would suggest to you that you look at the market situation at the moment. Farmers have never received more for their milk and meat than we are currently. People are looking for quality, well-farmed food supplies. So I don't think that we're at risk. I think we do need to keep our game up, but I think that farming will continue for a long time to come.